Hello and welcome to the Anatomy of a Leader with me, Maria Hvorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search, working at the intersection of creativity, retail, and digital. Each month, I discover more about founders, investors, CEOs, chairmen, and women, how they succeeded, how they failed, and what they learned along the way. So Peter, thank you so much for having us here at the Superdry showroom.
My pleasure.
Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
I was just racking my brains and I've realised that I've known you my entire career,
Wow.
which is spanning 15 years. And during this time, what I've noticed about you is that you're you're curious about people. You stay very current. You always like to, be involved and be aware of what's going on. And you've always been very supportive. You've always willing to give back. And I really appreciate that about you.
It's a pleasure.
And also during this time, so you've left your position as a CEO of Selfridges.
Yep.
And became more of a collector of chairmanship, so to speak. So Superdry, Sophia Webster at the moment, amongst others, and then ASOS and Boohoo in the past.
Yep.
Very colourful, very interesting career. And very interested to hear your story and about your journey and how you came to be where you are today. So, if you can tell us how you started and...
Sure.
To hear your story.
So by background, I'm actually an accountant. So I started off after I left university working for what was then one of the big 8 accounting firms. Got the precious piece of paper, then worked in their consultancy business, which is what is Accenture today, basically. It was Anderson Consulting before that. I did my time at Anderson's for about 7 years and then went into industry. And I've always worked really in consumer products or consumer-facing businesses. So I started in a division of Sony. I then worked for a private company which sold sound recording equipment. And then my first job in retail really was as group financial controller at Freeman's, which was a really traditional, very old style, large catalogue, 1,000 pages issued twice a year. And from Freeman's I went to Selfridges, where I was finance director. I was at Selfridges when we did the huge refurbishment for the first time of Oxford Street in the 90s. And we opened stores also for the first time outside London. We became a public company. We were then acquired. I then became CEO. We were acquired then by the Weston family, who own it today. And I suppose if I was to pick up, one point in my executive career that was really the zenith, if you like, it was, that time at Selfridges, which was so fantastic.
You must have seen a lot of change during that time, so lots was happening and different transitions of the business as well.
Yes.
So fascinating.
Yes, I mean I think that the thing about retail, particularly since the arrival of the internet, is it's constantly changing. There are more stores than the customer really needs. So every retailer is beholden to try and show the customer something new, something they haven't seen before. You compete with people's leisure time for whether it's going to the cinema or going to a football match or going to a concert or just going out with their friends. Retail no longer is a necessity. Retail is something that people can do at any time, 24/7. Particularly via the internet.
We talked a lot about shopping and fashion as entertainment. Do you think it's more that now than it has ever been in the past?
I think it is, particularly for things like fashion. I mean, obviously in the sort of commodity-based supermarkets, for example, that is still a necessity. But if you think about it, when you get up on a Saturday morning, you don't sort of throw off the bed covers and go, yes, wow, I'm off to Tesco's for the morning shop. You might say that, though, if you're going, say, to a Selfridges or a Harrods or a Harvey Nichols. Those sorts of places still provide, I think, a point of difference and a real buzz factor, which is different to the more staple purchases that you have to make for your life.
Sure. So since Selfridges, you've been doing lots of non-executive work, being a chairman. Can you tell us a little bit more about
Yes, I mean, I did 2 CEO roles in my career. The first was at Selfridges, and the second was with a company called Alpha, who did tax and duty-free retail and flight catering, providing food to go on board aircraft. And I finished my executive career, I suppose, say 10 or so years ago. And since then, I've been doing really a portfolio of either non-exec directorships or now much more chairmanships. And it's just a different thing. I mean, the reality is that when you get to my age, you know, I'm 65, you know, when you get to my age, if you want to continue working full time, it's more likely that you're going to be doing non-executive and chair roles and you're going to be running a business. That's just the statistical reality. And I enjoy work, you know, I'm happy to work full time. I don't play golf, and I enjoy particularly the sort of consumer-facing parts of the things that I do, and the fact that I also do some things outside the UK as well.
No, I always noticed that about you, that you really love the industry and you always are paying attention to what is going on.
Yes, I think the particularly in fashion, it is changing so fast and it changes so fast, and there's not a sort of rule about really, well, this is going to be the hot product. I mean, yes, in the luxury world, you know, the brands do get behind the you know, the new bag or the new look or whatever, but actually it's not automatic that the consumer latches on to certain things. And particularly since the sort of advent, which is even more the case now, that's been the case for decades, the advent of sort of celebrity fashion and the association with what celebrities are wearing. You know, David Beckham wore the famous Osaka 6 t-shirt, and Superdry then sold them in their millions. You know, there was no rationale for that. They weren't expecting that. But that's a quirk of what can go on.
And now everyone's trying to repeat that kind of unrepeatable kind of like viral things that you don't plan. But
yes, I mean, as I said, I don't think celebrity fashion is a new idea at all. It goes back to Princess Grace, and you know, it goes back decades, if not sort of centuries, if you like. We're always intrigued by what famous people or you know, our icons are wearing and what they're doing and what they're up to and all the rest of it.
And what is it that you love about what you do?
I think now, I mean, now it's slightly different. I do miss, if I'm honest, the executive role and the executive life when you're with the team doing stuff and you're very much part of that team. Now, you know, I'm much more of a kind of casual visitor, as it were, to the 5 or so companies that I'm involved with. But I like the variety. I like seeing other people. You know, I think, you know, my responsibility now is not so much to obviously lead a business. I lead the board, but I don't lead the business. And I see my role, you know, very much as, you know, trying to make sure that the company becomes successful, and then allowing the executives to enjoy that, because I know that from my own career, particularly at Selfridges, you know, when we achieved something that was, you know, almost world class, that's a tremendous fillip. You know, I think that, you know, when we go home and we're with our friends and we're over the dinner table at home and all the rest of it, you know, you want to be positive. People come to work to shine. You know, they want to be there to do good things generally. And I think if you're able to achieve that in your life, that's really fantastic. So
how did you adjust from running a business to then operating more at the board level rather than being directly involved with the kind of execution?
I mean, it is very different, and I think that, you know, you have to be very clear as a chair that you're there to run the board, not the business. I think that those situations which can occur where, you know, it's not quite clear who's doing what is quite dangerous. It's dangerous for the business, and it's dangerous for the, you know, for the value creation within the business, quite frankly. I was quite lucky because at an early stage in my career, when I was still CEO at Selfridges, I did one non-executive, and that was actually at Capital Radio. So again, another very fun business, very London-centric, obviously. But that gave me a stepping stone into, if you like, what was expected as to the sort of second part of my career, if you like, in terms of doing non-exec directorships. And I went on from there, really.
I know you said you started as an accountant, but what inspired you in the early days, or, you know, was there a special role model, or, you know, how did it
No, I mean, I think that when I left university, you know, I hadn't done a business degree, which I think if I was going through university now is definitely what I would do. You know, I did maths at university. And I felt that, you know, this is way back in the 70s, you know, doing the accounting qualification was almost akin to doing a business degree, but you got paid for it because you worked for a firm. And that's why I went and did that, because it gave me you know, exposure to a whole variety of different businesses. One of the audits I worked on way back was Habitat and the Comrade Associates. So I sort of got a bit of a flavour from that in terms of the retail world. And what I like about it, sort of unashamedly, is the feeling that, you know, I'm involved with businesses where I might be the customer. Right. So it's a product or a brand or a service or something that I myself might do or enjoy. And I think that really then, you know, at a simple level kind of helps you really relate to the business, because you look at it through the eyes of the customer. And I often try, you know, in board meetings to sort of, you know, do exactly that and say to people, okay, so what's the customer view on this? Because otherwise, you know, very often companies can get very internalized about what they're doing and how they're looking at things, and they're not looking at it from the outside in, they're looking at it from the inside out.
We obviously talk about successes, and you've had a very successful career, but less so about failures. Can you tell us about a time where you have failed? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I quite early on in my career, I was, when I was a group financial controller at a subsidiary of Sony, I was, one of the things we were doing was to put in a new computer system, which I was responsible for. Although, you know, we went through the process, selecting the right system and all the rest of it, what I didn't do was I didn't put in enough resources to the actual implementation of it. So I sort of ended up being sucked into the actual process far too much. And I ended up working sort of crazy hours to get this thing done, and it didn't really get implemented with, you know, enough of sort of controls around it. So I've learnt from that kind of bitter experience, if you like, to make sure that things like that get properly resourced, and that there are early warning signs if things are not going according to plan. So you make sure that you've actually got the right resources. And I've also been in businesses, you know, to be candid, where which have gone into administration. You know, I was at Black's when, you know, I was appointed by the bank to be the chairman, because they were concerned about, you know, what was happening to the business. And in the end, the only route through it was to actually put it through a pre-pack administration, which was a very painful process for the business and for many of the people involved. But the business ended up being bought by JD Sports, which I think is a very good retailer, you know, very much in that sector. So although, you know, it did result in quite a number of people losing their jobs, you know, it was the right outcome, because the majority of the stores were kept. And the majority of people's livelihoods, you know, were protected.
No, it's like having to stay a little bit impartial to that and really focusing on what's the right thing for the business.
Yes, I mean, I think, dare I say it, you know, as you get a bit older, you've seen a few of these scenarios, so you're not necessarily spooked. When difficult times come around, and it's important, particularly if you're chairing the board, that you've got people around the table who, you know, when the headlights come on, don't sort of, you know, as it were, run for the hills, if you like. That everybody stays calm and works methodically through it. And, you know, that's really important in terms of where we are right now with, you know, the current both, you know, political and economic climate. It's all too easy to panic and do the wrong thing.
So what do you think is happening in the industry right now? What are your thoughts about that?
So, I mean, I think, you know, retail will continue in a strong voice. You know, there may be fewer stores, and there may be much more happening digitally, but I don't think it's the end of the high street, personally.
You don't think retail is dead?
No, not at all, not at all. No, and physical retail, I think, will always have a place, because actually people like to go out. I mean, not everybody will do this all the time, and they may well make sort of commodity purchases because they know their size and they've bought that style before, so why not just order it online? They may well do that, but I still think there can be a drama and a theatre in stores which you can go to visit, and you don't as yet, you don't completely get that experience on that immersive sort of experience online. So I think that
The two are completely different.
yeah, I think you do the two things, but it does mean that for all retailers, the pressure is on to make their physical environments much more interesting and much more theatrical and
you can't just put things on the shelves anymore. You have to really work for it.
No, exactly right. Exactly
well,
right.
as a chairman, I mean, you're a chairman of a very strong retail business, but also have been on the boards of online companies.
Yeah.
Obviously dealing with lots of different personalities, very strong personalities. What do you think makes you a good chairman?
Well, I think you really have to ask the people I work with if that's the case or not, because I don't think it's for me to sort of talk it up.
Well,
if
you
you
must
like.
be.
No. I mean, I think that the things that I try to ensure happen is one, that I chair the board, I don't run the business, and that there is a clear line between what I do and what the CEO does. The relationship with the CEO is really important, and sometimes that can be more difficult where the CEO, as I have done in 2 or 3 places now, is also the founder of the business, because they've grown up with it. It may be the only place they've ever worked, so they have no experience of other businesses. So all they know is the business they've worked in. But some of these people, like Nick Robertson and Julian Dunkerton, they've achieved so much. It's absolutely fantastic. The secret for them all, and I think those two generally are pretty good at this, is to recognise the bits that they're not so good at, and make sure they bring in people, to look after those sorts of things.
And how do you deal with that? I mean, if you notice, a challenging situation with the founder or a CEO, how do you resolve that?
Well, I mean, you have to try and avoid being too direct, because sometimes they just sort of, rear up against it and won't listen. It's important that you've got the kind of support of your colleagues your other non-exec colleagues on the board, but it's not something that you can shy away from if you're a public company, because at the end of the day, even though the founders sat there and perhaps running the business and has a very large share stake, they're not the only shareholder. And in a way, the role of the chair is to make sure that the shareholders who aren't in the room have a voice and are represented and will be happy, with what's being done.
Can you tell me about a challenging situation that you have been in and how you handled that?
So when I first went to Selfridges way back in 1991, so a long time ago, Selfridges at that time was a really old-fashioned department store. So Harrods had some money spent on it by Mohammed Al Fayed, maybe not all of it very wisely, but Harvey Nichols was the number 2 store in London, because all the whole Ab Fab series, and it was very sort of cool fashion-wise. Selfridges in the early 90s was almost like Grace Brothers personified. Quite old-fashioned. Parts of the store weren't connected properly. It had didn't have escalators connecting all sections of the building. The electrics were sort of like 40 years old. The shop fits were very tired, and most importantly, we couldn't attract even the obvious brands at that time, like Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein, to supply the store, because they said the store was too grotty. Selfridges had a big plan that they presented to the then shareholder, the then owner of the business, which was Sears, which was a very large UK retail conglomerate. They presented this plan to completely rejuvenate Selfridges on Oxford Street. The problem was this came with like a 40 million price tag, so it was a huge amount of money, because Sears were only used to spending about £5 or £7 million a year on Selfridges. I'll come back to this, but we eventually spent 93 million, but that's beside the point. So what we did was we went to, and there was a stalemate between Sears, who said we're not prepared to invest all this money, and Selfridges saying, well, if you don't do this, the store's going to die eventually. So we went back to Sears and said, okay, we still want to do the big project, but we need to prove it to you. So we did just a section of the store. So in 1993, we refurbished the whole of the east end of the building, which is where you see Louis Vuitton and all the luxury handbags today. And we put in a new set of escalators in that section of the store all the way up. We opened the aperture up so you could see, if you came in on the ground floor, you could see all the way to the 4th floor and realize there was lots of exciting products to go and see further up the store. And the results from just doing that section of the store, was up 25%, when the rest of the store was probably flat or up 2%. And it's a little bit like, if you go and, you think your sitting room at home is a bit tired, so you redecorate it. So you redecorate it, and then you
You
realise
just see the contrast.
I've got to do the rest of the house. So in a way, Sears were then on the hook. So having done just this east end of the building, this eastern section, we then went on over a period of 5 years in total to completely redo Oxford Street.
Amazing.
And out of that came what I think, what people have genuinely sort of judged is possibly the best department store in the world.
Very proud of that.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Fantastic for the team because hundreds of people worked on this.
No, amazing. No, it'd be good to talk about your kind of personal habits and whether you have like a daily ritual or something that you do on a day-to-day basis. So how do you keep on top of things?
I mean, my diary is pretty fluid in the sense that I do lots of different things. I chair 5 companies. One's in Berlin, one's in Istanbul, one's in Cheltenham, and then the other 2 are here in London. So I move around quite a bit, but that's fine, and I like that. Once the board meetings are all set, actually that kind of blocks out certain days, if you like. But actually within all of that, I just make sure I spend enough time talking to people, whether it's to people within the company or whether it's people in the sector and all the rest of it.
No, I have noticed that about you. You're very good with people, very warm and very curious and interested.
That's very generous of you to say that, Maria.
I really think that. And do you have a personal mantra?
No, I not really. I mean, I suppose I look at. I think you should enjoy work. As I've said before, if people, you need to come to work and enjoy it. I mean, really, if you're not enjoying it, you should go and do something else, because life is really too short. And I think it's important that the people around you who are working with you in the team that they enjoy it too, because you will then obviously get the best out of them. I encourage people to be, very open and very honest. If there's a problem, tell me. Don't let me discover it, and then don't let me sort of get to a situation where you probably, or me thinking that you should have told me. It's much better to be open and honest about this thing. And then, you can bring all sorts of resources together, to try and resolve the issue. And the reality is, in any company, in any business, in any organisation, there will always be issues. And they're not always created by people within the company. Sometimes they're created, by people outside.
No, it's hard to deal with people on a day-to-day basis and having to first identify what the problem is and then to actually be able to resolve
Yeah, and
that.
I think the other thing that in retail that's so important and in business generally is the whole communication thing. That actually, you can have an individual who may be, I mean, obviously they need to be competent at what they do, but actually if they're a good communicator in terms of how they deal with people, then, they'll get so much further than people who sort of, work behind a closed door. And in retail, that's so important. In a way, it's inbred in everybody, in the better people, because they know they've got to work on a shop floor, they've got to deal with members of the public, and members of the public sometimes can be, incredibly demanding. And you've got to work to their agenda, not yours. So it kind of, the industry, one of the great things about the industry, it attracts people, who are generally quite outgoing and quite sociable.
That's true.
And all that.
We actually did a video blog not so long ago talking about millennials and how they are not necessarily so good at the face-to-face communication because of kind of hiding behind screens, etc. Have you noticed that, or are there any generational differences between different generations with how they communicate? Or
I think there can be. I think that. I think technology is fantastic in the way it's freed people to be more flexible about where they work, when they work. But one of the things I always think, and it sounds a bit old-fashioned, but one of the things I think that is always useful is the coming together face-to-face. And sometimes it's not possible with certain board meetings, but generally I'm pretty insistent that we always meet in a place and everybody is there around the table, because it's only then that you can sort of pick up the nuances from people's body language as to what they're really thinking and what they're feeling. And when you do things like conference calls, sometimes it can be
missing.
Yeah, that's right. And it can be the person who sort of shouts first and shouts the most, who sort of dominates the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And you know, everybody's there. Everybody should be heard. So as I said, technology is fantastic for a whole load of things, and does make lots of processes really much more efficient. But I don't think you should let your whole existence be dominated or ruled, if you like, by the technology.
No, for sure. So Peter, what advice would you give your younger self, or somebody who's wanting to embark on a similar career to you?
Well, I think that, you know, in my case, I started out very much, you know, going through the finance accountancy route, and actually, if I had my time over again, I would have done probably a business degree, knowing what I know now. I think that I might have gone into industry sooner. I mean, I spent 7 years in the professions. Maybe I should have, you know, just done that maybe for 3 years. But that's not a huge deal. I mean, I'm somebody actually who is, it sounds a bit sort of self-centered, but you know, I'm actually pretty content with where I am and all the rest of it. I get to do most of the things I want to do. I've worked with some amazing people. I've had some tough times and I've had some good times. And I feel that, you know, you should enjoy the successful moments, because everybody gets tough times, and you know, they kind of balance those out a bit. But actually you learn more from the tough times than you do in success. And so that makes you, I think, ultimately, you know, a stronger person at the end of it.
And I suppose also being in the industry as many years as you have been, you've seen,
Be careful
you've seen
here.
it all. You were the one who mentioned it.
No, I know I did. Yeah,
yeah, so you've seen at different stages, and you know, kind of like highs and lows, and it's never really a consistent kind of straightforward path.
No.
And you know, kind of riding the highs and kind of weathering the lows, because they all kind of come around again. So
yes, and that's why, you know, if you do get into a crisis of whatever it happens to be, you know, it's just important everybody remains calm, works together, and works methodically through it. And actually, usually you will get through it. And you know, a year later you'll be looking back thinking, well, that was tough, but I learned a few things from it.
Sure. And who's been the toughest person to work with?
That's a very interesting question. I think that, so I think in terms of tough, but it was good for me in the sense that I learnt a lot. We had a very strong chairman at Selfridges, a guy called Alan Cathcart, who actually was enormously helpful to me in my career, because he helped me make the transition from being, as he said himself, Dr. No, the finance director, to become the CEO, and I would never have gone on to do that without his help. But he's quite a sort of tough, not disciplinarian is probably the wrong word, but he was a very methodical, very precise, very clear individual, and at the time I was working for Vittorio Radici, who was very flamboyant Italian, and Alan was almost like the sort of antidote to that, if you like. So he was tough, but in a good way. I think the challenges more recently have come for me in terms of, you know, where I've been working with very strong entrepreneurs like Mahmood at Boohoo, you know, who has built a fantastic business and done really, really well. But sometimes, you know, these people can, you know, forget that actually they're not the only shareholder, and that there are other things, and now that they're a public company, you know, these things need to be adhered to.
And what does leadership mean to you?
So I think that, I mean, you know, as I've said a few times, you know, leadership for me, you know, I lead the board, I don't lead the business. And I guess I would say that leadership for me is really just providing an environment through which the executive can succeed and are given opportunities, and then allowing them to enjoy those moments when they do achieve.
Yeah.
So I'm providing, I think, the environment and the circumstances. They have to achieve them.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter.
It's a pleasure.
Really good to talk to you, and
Thank
for
you.
you to share your story. And as always, if we can be helpful somehow,
Thank you.
then let us know.